The Duchess of Ashbourne attempted to poison her own husband.
Cedric's accusation struck the dining hall with greater force than a pistol shot. Conversation died around the table. An ambassador's wife froze with her wineglass halfway to her lips. Lord Haverford lowered his fork, while the two parliamentary ministers seated beside him turned openly toward Eleanor. At the head of the table, Cedric Ashbourne stood rigid beneath the gilded portrait of his grandfather. His face was pale after the seizure that had nearly killed him, but his voice carried to every corner of the room. A footman stepped forward, holding a silver bottle upon a black velvet cushion. Eleanor recognized it immediately. The engraved bottle belonged in her private laboratory. The liquid inside it contained foxglove concentrated beyond any medicinal dose. Yet Eleanor had locked the bottle and the powdered leaves in separate cabinets 3 weeks earlier, after discovering that someone had disturbed her inventory. She looked past the footman to Lady Lavinia Crowe. The young widow stood beside Cedric, wearing an ivory evening gown and the expression of a woman struggling bravely against sorrow. At her waist hung a ring of household keys, Eleanor's keys. "Where did you find that bottle?" Eleanor asked. "In His Grace's dressing room," Lavinia replied softly, "beside the glass from which he drank." A murmur traveled down the table. "That is impossible." Eleanor kept her voice controlled. "The bottle was secured in my laboratory." "Secured by you," Cedric said. "Accessible only to you. And to anyone possessing those keys." Every eye shifted toward Lavinia's waist. For one fleeting second, fear tightened the widow's mouth. Then she placed a trembling hand over the keys. "Your Grace entrusted them to me after the Duchess began behaving unpredictably." Eleanor turned to her husband. "You gave her access to my laboratory?" "I gave her authority to protect this household." "You gave her authority over rooms she does not understand." Cedric's jaw hardened. "And still, you accuse everyone except yourself." The words carried years of resentment. Once he had praised Eleanor's knowledge of medicinal plants. During the fever epidemic, he had watched her work through 6 nights without sleep, and told the tenants that Ashbourne owed her more lives than it could count. But admiration had gradually curdled into humiliation. Ministers sought her judgment on hospital sanitation. Royal physicians requested her formulas. Each public compliment paid to Eleanor seemed to remind Cedric that his wife possessed an authority he could neither grant nor withdraw. Lavinia had understood that wound from the moment she entered their household. Eleanor approached the footman. "Give me the bottle." He drew back and looked to Cedric. "You will touch nothing," the Duke ordered. "I can determine whether the contents match what poisoned you. The royal physician has already done so. Dr. Vale examined you for 12 minutes while you were unconscious." Did he test the liquid, or merely accept Lavinia's account of where it was found? Cedric's expression changed, not with doubt, but anger at having his judgment questioned before his guests. "He found traces of foxglove in my glass." "That proves what harmed you. It does not prove who placed it there." Lavinia inhaled sharply. "I saw Eleanor carry a silver bottle into your dressing room this afternoon." Eleanor stared at her. "At what hour?" "Shortly before 5. At 5, I was in the Royal Conservatory with 6 gardeners and Sir Matthew Elwyn." Green pollen still stained Eleanor's right wrist, where a torn glove had exposed her skin. She raised it for the room to see. Sir Matthew, an elderly botanist seated near the fireplace, began to rise. "That is true. Her Grace was—" Cedric lifted one hand, silencing him. The gesture revealed a thin line of red wax beneath his left thumbnail. Eleanor stopped breathing. She knew that precise shade. It was used on the seals protecting the toxic cabinet in her laboratory. Eleanor had mixed the pigment herself with vermilion and resin so that any broken seal could be identified. Cedric had sworn he had never entered that cabinet. "Show me your hand," she said. His eyes narrowed. "What?" "Your left hand." The red fragment disappeared as Cedric curled his fingers against his palm. "You see?" Lavinia whispered to the guests. "She does not even understand the seriousness of what she has done." "Oh, I understand it perfectly." Eleanor looked directly at her husband. "Someone opened my poison cabinet, and you know more about it than you have admitted." Cedric descended from the dais. For a moment, Eleanor saw the man she had married 12 years earlier, proud, intelligent, and terrified of appearing weak. He stopped close enough that only she could see the tremor in his hand. "I gave you every opportunity to end these accusations privately," he said. "You chose to shame me before ministers and foreign dignitaries. You accused me of attempted murder before them, because I nearly died. And because believing Lavinia is easier than admitting you ignored my warnings." His eyes flashed. That was the moment he could have asked why the laboratory seal marked his hand. He could have cleared the hall, secured the evidence, and listened to the wife who had saved his estates during 2 epidemics. Instead, he turned toward the magistrate. "Lady Lavinia Crowe will assume authority over the household until further notice. My wife is to be confined to the East Apartments, pending a medical examination. She will have no access to her laboratory, correspondence, income, or our son." Eleanor's composure fractured at the final words. "You will not take Julian from me. He will be protected from you." 2 guards moved toward her. Cedric avoided her eyes as one seized her arm. Eleanor looked again at the silver bottle. A faint black line circled its stopper. Not dust, soot. Her laboratory contained no open flame, but the old royal pharmacy used coal furnaces beneath its preparation room. The same pharmacy was preparing the Queen's medicine for Parliament's opening ceremony in 48 hours. "If that bottle came through the royal pharmacy," Eleanor said, "then your poisoning was only a test." Cedric turned sharply. Before she could explain, the dining hall doors opened and a royal messenger stumbled inside, rainwater streaming from his coat. "Your Grace," he gasped. "The Queen collapsed at St. James's Palace. Her physicians believe she has been poisoned." This time, every face turned toward Eleanor. Lady Lavinia smiled. Lady Lavinia's smile vanished before anyone else saw it. Cedric released a ragged breath and gripped the edge of the table. "Is Her Majesty alive?" "When I departed, yes," the royal messenger answered, "but she cannot speak, and her pulse is failing." The palace physician found a silver bottle beside her medicine tray. A frightened murmur swept through the hall. The magistrate stepped between Eleanor and the door. Was it marked? The Ashbourne crest was engraved upon it. Every gaze fell on Eleanor once more. Lavinia pressed a hand to her mouth. Then the Duchess must have prepared more than one. "No," Eleanor said. "Someone prepared several bottles and used my crest to connect every poisoning to me." Cedric looked at the messenger. "Did the palace request my wife?" "The Privy Council ordered both of you brought to St. James's immediately." "That will not be necessary," Dr. Vale said. He had remained silent beside the fireplace since the accusation began. Now he entered the candlelight, carrying a leather case and a folded document. "Her Grace is in no condition to approach the Queen. I examined the Duchess this morning and found unmistakable signs of mental derangement." Eleanor stared at him. "You never examined me." Vale ignored her and handed the paper to the magistrate. "She suffers from persecutory delusions, violent suspicion, and an obsession with poison. For the safety of the crown, she must be confined." The magistrate read the certificate. "It bears the signatures of 2 physicians. The second man is Dr. Percival Hume," Eleanor said. "He has been dead for 6 months." Silence returned. Vale's face tightened. You are mistaken. I attended his funeral. Eleanor lunged for the document, but one guard seized both her arms. The certificate tilted in the magistrate's hand, allowing her to glimpse the wax seal beneath the signatures, red wax, the same mixture from her laboratory. The conspiracy was no longer simply borrowing her bottles. Someone had stolen her private sealing compound and used it to manufacture evidence. "Take her upstairs," Cedric ordered. The messenger stepped forward. "Your Grace, the Privy Council's command, my wife has just been declared medically unfit." "By a document signed by a dead man," Eleanor said. "If you surrender me to Dr. Vale now, the Queen will die before dawn." Cedric's expression flickered, but Lavinia moved closer and touched his sleeve. "She predicted this," Lavinia whispered. "She knew the Queen would be poisoned because she planned it." Eleanor watched Cedric accept the explanation. It demanded no admission that he had ignored her warnings or allowed Lavinia access to the laboratory. Believing his wife guilty protected his pride. "Remove her," he said. The guards dragged Eleanor from the hall. As they crossed the entrance gallery, she caught sight of Julian on the upper landing. Her 7-year-old son stood barefoot in his nightshirt, clutching the carved wooden horse she had given him. "Mama?" Eleanor stopped so abruptly that the guards nearly lost their grip. "Return to your room, Julian," Cedric called from behind her. The boy stared at the hands restraining his mother. "Lady Lavinia said you tried to kill Papa." Eleanor's heart contracted. "Listen to me. I did not harm your father." Lavinia appeared beside Cedric. The child should not hear more of her delusions. Julian shrank from her voice. Eleanor noticed a faint blue stain at the corner of his mouth. "What has he taken?" Cedric frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Julian, did anyone give you medicine tonight?" The boy nodded. "Lady Lavinia said it would help me sleep." Eleanor tore free of one guard and ran up the first 3 steps before the other caught her around the waist. "Do not let him sleep," she shouted. "The blue tincture suppresses the breath. Make him walk and bring me salt water." Lavinia's face drained of color. "He is perfectly well," she insisted. Julian's wooden horse slipped from his fingers. His knees folded, and he collapsed on the landing. Cedric ran to him. Eleanor fought the guards with enough force to rip one sleeve from her gown. "Bring him to me." For once, Cedric obeyed. He carried Julian down and laid him across a bench. The child's skin had turned gray, his breathing shallow. Eleanor smelled his lips and recognized valerian mixed with black henbane, dangerous to an adult, potentially fatal to a child. "Who gave you the bottle?" Eleanor demanded of Lavinia. "It was the tonic you prepared." "I have never prescribed henbane for Julian." Dr. Vale stepped toward the boy with a syringe. Eleanor slapped it from his hand. Glass shattered across the marble floor. "That contains laudanum. It will stop his breathing entirely." "She is becoming violent," Vale said. "She is saving our son," Cedric replied. The words came instinctively, but Eleanor heard the disbelief beneath them. He knelt beside her, while she forced Julian to swallow warm salt water. The child gagged, then vomited a dark blue liquid onto the carpet. Among the liquid lay a fragment of paper. Eleanor lifted it carefully. Part of a pharmacy label remained legible beneath the stain. "For Her Majesty's private cabinet." Cedric looked from the label to Lavinia. The front doors burst open before he could speak. 6 royal guards entered under the command of Lord Haverford. "Eleanor Ashbourne," Haverford announced, "you are under arrest for conspiracy against the crown." Behind him, flames suddenly illuminated the courtyard. A servant screamed from outside. "The Duchess's laboratory is burning." Eleanor turned toward the windows. Fire climbed the eastern wing, consuming the room that held her records, her formulas, and every inventory that could prove what had been stolen. Then she saw a dark figure fleeing from the laboratory door. The man carried Dr. Vale's leather case. The royal guards pulled Eleanor toward the waiting carriage while servants rushed past with buckets. Flames devoured the laboratory windows, sending sparks across the courtyard. "The man with Dr. Vale's case," Eleanor called to Lord Haverford. He fled toward the south garden. Haverford looked in that direction, but the darkness had already swallowed the figure. "Search the grounds," he ordered 2 guards. "Take Dr. Vale into custody until we establish why his property was carried from the fire." Vale stepped backward. "This is absurd. My case was stolen." "Then you should welcome the investigation," Eleanor said. A burning window shattered overhead. Cedric emerged carrying Julian, whose breathing remained weak but steady. Lavinia followed them, coughing theatrically into a handkerchief. Eleanor tried to approach her son. A guard blocked her. "He needs to remain awake for several hours," she told Cedric. "Give him water in small amounts. If his breathing slows, rub his hands and feet. Do not allow Vale near him." Cedric looked down at Julian. The child's fingers clung weakly to his lapel. "I will bring Julian with us," Cedric said. "No," Lavinia protested. "The palace may be dangerous. So is this house." For the first time, Cedric's distrust touched her. Lavinia recovered quickly. "Then, allow me to care for him." Eleanor's voice cut across the courtyard. "She poisoned him with medicine stolen from the Queen." "That has not been proven," Cedric replied. "You saw the label. I saw a fragment of paper in vomit. I do not know how it came to be there." Even now, he searched for an explanation that preserved his original judgment. Lord Haverford opened the carriage door. "We are wasting time. The Privy Council is waiting." Eleanor, Cedric, Julian, and Haverford entered the royal carriage. Lavinia attempted to follow, but Haverford barred the door. "Only those named in the warrant." "I am acting Mistress of Ashbourne," she said. "Then remain and protect what is left of it." The carriage departed, leaving Lavinia illuminated by the burning laboratory. Inside, Eleanor sat opposite Cedric, with her shackled hands resting in her lap. Julian lay between them, his head against his father's chest. Cedric finally spoke. "Why would anyone poison our son?" "To silence me. He is 7 years old. He knows nothing. He knew who gave him the medicine." Cedric's face tightened. "You entrusted Lavinia with my keys," Eleanor continued. "You allowed Vale to condemn me using a dead physician's signature. When I showed you evidence, you called it madness. I did not place poison in my own glass." "No, you merely opened the door for those who did." Haverford watched them without interruption. Cedric lowered his voice. "You believe I broke the laboratory seal." Eleanor looked at his left hand. The red wax had been scraped away. "It was beneath your thumbnail. I entered the laboratory yesterday. You swore before 50 witnesses that you never had. Lavinia told me you were hiding correspondence there. I found nothing. You broke the seal because she asked you to." Cedric's silence answered. Eleanor felt something colder than grief settle inside her. He had not merely believed the evidence. He had helped create the opportunity for it to be planted, then lied to protect his pride. "What did you touch?" "One cabinet. Several bottles had been moved. And you did not tell me. I intended to question you tonight. You accused me before questioning me." The carriage stopped at St. James's Palace. Royal guards escorted them through corridors filled with frightened servants. Outside the Queen's chamber, 3 physicians argued beside a table covered with medicine bottles. Sir Matthew Elwyn stood among them. "The Queen's pulse is weakening," he said when he saw Eleanor. "They refuse to administer anything without knowing the poison." Lord Haverford raised her shackled hands. "She remains a prisoner." "Then let the prisoner save Her Majesty." Cedric moved between Eleanor and the chamber. "If she gives the Queen another poison, Eleanor met his eyes. "If you prevent me from entering, the Queen may be dead within the hour. Decide which consequence you are prepared to own." Before Cedric could answer, the bedroom door opened. The Prince Regent appeared, his face colorless with rage. "Release her hands," he ordered. The shackles fell away. Eleanor entered the chamber and found the Queen motionless beneath white linen. Her lips were blue, but her skin was unnaturally hot. A bitter, almond-like odor lingered on her breath, mixed with foxglove. Two poisons. One slowed the heart, the other starved the body of air. Treating only one would ensure the Queen died from the other. Eleanor examined the silver bottle beside the bed. The Ashbourne crest was genuine, but its base carried a nearly invisible number, I, hex, her 9th laboratory bottle. It had disappeared 7 months earlier, shortly after Lavinia arrived at Ashbourne. "I need charcoal, mustard powder, warm water, and the contents of the Queen's ordinary medicine cabinet," Eleanor ordered. The chief royal physician bristled. "You are accused of causing this, and you have failed to reverse it." The Prince Regent pointed toward the door. "Give her whatever she requests." Eleanor worked quickly, forcing a charcoal mixture between the Queen's lips before preparing a counteragent to support her heart. Minutes passed. Nothing changed. Then the Queen convulsed. Cedric moved forward, but Eleanor held the Queen's shoulders and administered the final drops. Slowly, painfully, Her Majesty drew a deeper breath. Her pulse strengthened beneath Eleanor's fingers. The room exhaled with her. The Queen's eyes opened briefly. Her gaze found Eleanor, and one trembling hand closed around her wrist. "Journal," she whispered. "What journal, Your Majesty?" "Vale's sealed journal." The Queen slipped back into unconsciousness. Dr. Vale suddenly turned and ran. Haverford tackled him before he reached the corridor. The physician's coat tore open, scattering papers across the floor. Among them was a letter bearing Lavinia's handwriting. Eleanor picked it up. The first line read, "Once the Queen is dead, Cedric will testify that his wife supplied the poison." But the final paragraph contained something even worse. It instructed Vale to remove Julian Ashbourne before sunrise and make the boy's death appear to be his mother's final act of revenge. Eleanor spun toward the bed where Julian had been resting. The chair was empty. Eleanor dropped Lavinia's letter and ran into the corridor. "Julian." No answer came from the crowded palace passage. Cedric followed, his face stripped of color. "He was beside me moments ago." "And you left him unattended?" "The Queen was dying. So was our son." Lord Haverford dragged Vale upright. "Where have they taken the boy?" "I know nothing." Eleanor seized the physician's torn coat. "Lavinia's letter says Julian must die before sunrise. Tell me who is helping her." Vale smiled despite the blood on his lip. "A mad woman threatening a physician inside the royal palace." "How fortunate that so many witnesses are present." Cedric struck him across the face. Vale collapsed against the wall. "That was not an answer," Cedric said. Eleanor looked at the papers scattered across the floor. Most were forged medical reports, but one sheet bore a list of initials beside carriage numbers. At the bottom, a fresh notation read, J.A. Northgate, 11:30. She glanced at the corridor clock, 11:24. The North Gate. They ran. Haverford shouted orders as royal guards poured down adjoining passages. Eleanor lifted her skirts and raced through the state apartments, guided by her memory of palace service routes. At the head of the north staircase, they found Julian's wooden horse. Its carved neck had been broken. Cedric picked it up, staring at the toy as though it were an accusation. "He trusted Lavinia because I told him to," he said. Eleanor did not slow. "Regret will not find him." They descended into the servants' corridor. Ahead, a door slammed. Eleanor reached the courtyard just as a black carriage began moving toward the gate. Its curtains were closed, and the driver wore no royal livery. "Stop that carriage!" Cedric shouted. The driver whipped the horses. Cedric seized a guard's mount and rode after it. Haverford followed with 2 soldiers, while Eleanor climbed onto the rear step of his horse without waiting for permission. The carriage burst through the gate and turned onto a narrow street. Cedric drew alongside and caught the door handle, but a pistol fired from inside. The shot tore through his coat and threw him from the saddle. "Cedric!" He struck the road hard. Eleanor nearly jumped down, but then she heard Julian screaming inside the carriage. She made her choice. "Keep going," she told Haverford. They overtook the carriage near St. James's Park. Haverford forced his horse against the lead animal while Eleanor reached for the carriage rail. Her fingers slipped once, then closed around the brass handle. She pulled herself onto the moving vehicle. A masked man opened the door and raised a pistol. Eleanor knocked his wrist against the frame. The shot shattered a window. She drove her shoulder into his chest, and both fell inside. Julian lay unconscious on the floor with a cloth tied over his mouth. The man reached for Eleanor's throat. She clawed at his mask and exposed the face beneath it. Mr. Rook, the assistant pharmacist who had delivered royal medicines to Ashbourne for 3 years. Eleanor drove her knee into his injured leg. He released her with a cry. She grabbed the pistol and struck him across the temple. Outside, the carriage swerved violently. One wheel hit the curb and broke apart. Eleanor covered Julian with her body as the carriage overturned. Glass, wood, and iron crashed around them. When she opened her eyes, blood ran from her forehead, but Julian was breathing. Haverford pulled them from the wreckage, while guards restrained Rook. Cedric arrived on foot, one arm hanging uselessly at his side. He reached for Julian. Eleanor stepped between them. "No," Cedric stopped. "He is my son. You used that right to remove him from my protection. You handed my keys to the woman who poisoned him. Until I know he is safe, you will not make another decision for him." Pain crossed Cedric's face, but he lowered his hand. It was the first boundary Eleanor had ever set that his title could not erase. Haverford searched the wreckage and recovered Dr. Vale's leather case. Inside were silver bottles, forged Ashbourne labels, and a ledger recording payments from Lavinia's brother, Lord Sebastian Crowe. The final entry was dated that morning, transfer of Ashbourne guardianship after the deaths of the Duchess and heir. Cedric read it twice. "Lavinia intended to control my estate. Through you," Eleanor said. "She needed you alive long enough to accuse me and grant her authority." A guard approached with a packet found beneath the driver's seat. The cover bore a parliamentary seal. Eleanor opened it and found a copy of Cedric's petition declaring her insane. Beneath his genuine signature was a hidden clause transferring Julian's guardianship and temporary control of Ashbourne to Lavinia if Eleanor was imprisoned. Cedric stared at the document. "I did not read the final page." "But you signed it," Eleanor replied. Before he could answer, Rook laughed from the ground. "You still think the estate is what she wants?" Eleanor crouched beside him. "What does Lavinia want?" Rook looked toward the palace, where the bells suddenly began ringing. "By midnight, Parliament will receive 12 letters proving Ashbourne financed an attempt on the crown. And every one of them carries the Duke's genuine seal." Cedric's face went still. The red wax beneath his fingernail had not come from opening Eleanor's cabinet. Lavinia had persuaded him to break the seal so she could press his signet into warm wax and create the impressions needed to condemn them both. The palace bells continued ringing as Lord Haverford ordered the prisoners taken inside. Eleanor carried Julian herself. The boy's breathing was stable, but he remained unconscious from the drug placed over his mouth. Cedric walked beside her, clutching his injured shoulder. "I gave Lavinia my signet," he admitted. "She said the estate solicitor needed it while I recovered." "When?" "6 weeks ago." "And you never asked which documents she sealed?" His silence was answer enough. Inside the palace guardroom, Rook was chained beside Dr. Vale. On the table lay the bottles, forged labels, and payment ledger recovered from the carriage. Haverford examined the parliamentary packet. "If those 12 letters reach Parliament, the Duke will be arrested for treason before dawn." "Arrest me," Cedric said, "but protect Eleanor and Julian." Eleanor looked at him coldly. "Sacrificing yourself now will not undo what you enabled. We need the letters." Rook smiled from his chair. "They have already been dispatched." "To whom?" Haverford demanded. 12 different members of Parliament." Eleanor opened the payment ledger. Each entry contained a recipient's initials and a number between 1 and 12. "They were not sent separately," she said. "These numbers mark a delivery order." She examined Rook's boots. Yellow clay covered the heels, mixed with black coal dust. "The messenger departed from the old royal pharmacy," she concluded. "Its courtyard opens onto the river road." Rook's smile weakened. Haverford sent guards to every parliamentary entrance, then prepared a carriage for the pharmacy. Cedric attempted to join them. "You are injured," Eleanor said. "I can still help. You have helped Lavinia enough." The words struck harder than the pistol shot had. Cedric stepped back. Eleanor left Julian under Sir Matthew's protection and departed with Haverford. They reached the abandoned pharmacy shortly before midnight. The front door stood open. Inside, furnaces burned beneath rows of copper vessels. Silver Ashbourne bottles covered a long table, each filled with diluted poison. Beside them lay forged letters describing payments to men supposedly hired by Cedric to assassinate the Queen. At the far end of the room, a messenger loaded a leather bag. "Stop!" Haverford shouted. The man overturned a lamp. Fire raced across a trail of spilled alcohol, separating him from the guards. Eleanor saw him escape through the rear door with the bag. She ran upstairs, crossed a narrow gallery above the flames, and descended through the storage room. Smoke burned her lungs, but she reached the river road as the messenger mounted his horse. Eleanor seized a hanging delivery chain and threw it across the gateway. The horse reared, throwing the rider onto the stones. Haverford's guards captured him. The leather bag contained 11 letters. "One is missing," Eleanor said. The prisoner laughed. "The first was delivered an hour ago." "To whom?" "Lord Sebastian Crowe. Lavinia's brother would present the letter personally, ensuring it entered the parliamentary record before anyone could challenge it." A furnace exploded inside the pharmacy. The blast threw Eleanor against the wall. As Haverford pulled her away from the flames, a burning cabinet collapsed and exposed a hidden iron box. Inside lay a black journal sealed with the royal physician's crest. Dr. Vale's journal. Eleanor broke the seal. Page after page recorded poison trials, payments from Sebastian, and Lavinia's plan to use Cedric's signature. Then she reached the final entry. Vale had written that Eleanor must be declared insane because she had unknowingly discovered the first stage of a larger operation. The Queen was not the true target. At Parliament's opening ceremony the next morning, poisoned incense would kill the Prince Regent, 6 ministers, and every heir standing near the throne. And the crates containing that incense had already entered Westminster. Eleanor tore the final page from Vale's journal and handed it to Haverford. "We must close Westminster. We cannot evacuate Parliament on the word of an accused traitor," he said. "Lord Sebastian will claim you wrote this yourself. The journal carries Vale's seal, and Vale has already certified you insane. The trap was complete. Every piece of evidence Eleanor offered could be dismissed as another invention of a disordered mind. She examined the entry again. Vale had listed the poisoned substance as compound E17, but no ingredients appeared beside it. Incense alone cannot kill an entire chamber quickly, Eleanor said. The compound must react with something already inside Westminster. Coal smoke? Possibly. Or heat, moisture, even metal. Haverford ordered the journal, and recovered letters secured. They returned to the palace as midnight sounded. Julian was awake when Eleanor entered the Queen's antechamber. He sat wrapped in a blanket beside Sir Matthew, clutching the broken pieces of his wooden horse. "Mamma." Eleanor knelt and held him carefully. His arms tightened around her neck. "Lady Lavinia said you wanted to send me away," he whispered. "She lied. Papa said she would look after me." Eleanor glanced toward Cedric. The Duke stood near the window with his injured arm bound against his chest. Shame darkened his face. "I was wrong, Julian," he said. "Your mother tried to warn me, and I refused to listen." It was the first truth Cedric had spoken without qualification, but Eleanor could not yet mistake honesty for repair. Sir Matthew handed her a small paper packet. This was hidden inside the boy's wooden horse. Julian looked frightened. "A servant told me to keep it safe. He said only Mama would understand." "Which servant?" "The old man from the garden." Sir Matthew stiffened. "Mr. Weller?" The Royal Conservatory keeper had disappeared shortly before Eleanor's arrest. She opened the packet. Inside lay gray powder mixed with tiny golden crystals. It smelled faintly of bitter almonds and burned roses. Sir Matthew touched one grain with a silver needle. The metal immediately darkened. "Mercury salt," he said, "and crushed laurel seed," Eleanor added, "but neither explains E17. A narrow strip of paper rested beneath the powder. Weller had written only 6 words. "It wakes when the bells grow warm." Cedric straightened. The bronze bells above Parliament? No. The heating pipes beneath the chamber. Westminster's ceremonial hall had recently installed a new steam heating system. Eleanor had inspected its ventilation during a sanitation review and remembered the brass grills beneath the royal gallery. If the incense powder entered those heated vents, it would release poisonous vapor throughout the room. "Who approved the new pipes?" Haverford asked. Cedric closed his eyes. "I did." Eleanor stared at him. "Sebastian proposed the project," he continued. "He said Parliament wanted a noble patron. Lavinia persuaded me it would restore Ashbourne's political influence." Every road led back to a choice Cedric had made in pursuit of admiration. "Do the construction plans remain at your estate?" Eleanor asked. "In my study." "Then Lavinia has them." A royal guard entered hurriedly. "My lord, Lady Lavinia Crowe has arrived at Westminster with Lord Sebastian. They are requesting an emergency session to present evidence against the Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne." "She is moving before we can stop her," Haverford said. Cedric reached for his coat. "Then we confront her publicly." "No," Eleanor replied. "She wants you angry and desperate. If you accuse her without proof, she will display your sealed letters and make herself appear innocent." "What do you propose?" "We let her begin." Before leaving, Eleanor placed Julian under armed royal protection. Then she turned to Cedric. "At Westminster, you will speak only when I tell you." He looked as if the command wounded his pride. This time, however, he nodded. They entered Parliament through a private passage shortly before 1 in the morning. From behind a carved screen, Eleanor saw Sebastian standing before a gathering of ministers. Lavinia waited beside him in mourning black, presenting herself as the betrayed guardian of Ashbourne. On the table lay the missing letter. "My brother-in-law planned the Queen's murder," Sebastian declared. "His wife supplied the poison. We possess their signatures, their seal, and the testimony of a royal physician. Several ministers demanded Cedric's arrest. Then servants entered, carrying 12 ornate incense crates toward the ceremonial hall. Eleanor recognized the insignia burned into the wood, the Ashbourne crest. Lavinia had ensured the murder weapon would bear their name. As the first crate passed the screen, Eleanor saw golden powder leaking through a crack onto the floor. A nearby heating pipe hissed. The powder began to smoke. Eleanor stepped from behind the screen. "Do not touch those crates." The ministers turned. Lavinia's expression remained composed, but Sebastian reached instinctively for the letter on the table. Eleanor pointed at the golden powder smoking beside the heating pipe. "Clear the ceremonial hall and extinguish every furnace beneath it. Cover your mouths and do not disturb the powder." Sebastian laughed. Must Parliament now obey the fantasies of a woman declared insane? A servant near the first crate began coughing. Blood appeared beneath his nose. Lord Haverford drew his sword. "Evacuate the chamber." The royal guards moved immediately. Ministers rushed toward the exits as servants poured water into the heating grills. Sir Matthew covered the leaking crate with a wet wool cloak. Lavinia slipped toward a side door. Eleanor blocked her path. "Leaving before your evidence is heard? I am escaping your poison. You brought it here." "I brought ceremonial incense, donated by Ashbourne, using authority Cedric gave you." Lavinia glanced toward the Duke. "He trusted me because he understood what you had become." Cedric entered the chamber. His coat concealed his injured arm, but his face revealed the cost of every decision that had led them there. "I trusted you because you flattered me," he said. "Eleanor warned me, and I punished her for knowing what I refused to see." Lavinia's composure cracked. Sebastian seized the missing letter and thrust it into a nearby brazier. Eleanor snatched a brass poker and pulled the burning paper free. Half the page blackened, but Cedric's signature and the Ashbourne seal survived. "There," Sebastian said, "proof of his treason." "No," Eleanor replied, "proof of yours." She placed the scorched letter beside one recovered from the messenger. The handwriting appeared identical, but the seals differed subtly. Cedric's true signet bore a tiny fracture across the lion's rear paw, caused when Julian dropped it 2 years earlier. The seal on Sebastian's letter had no fracture. "This impression was made from an older mold," Eleanor explained, "but the letters collected tonight carry the damaged paw. Lavinia created those after Cedric gave her his signet 6 weeks ago." Sebastian's face tightened. "That proves nothing about the Duke's intention. It proves the evidence was manufactured at different times." Haverford placed Vale's journal on the table. "And this records every payment your household made to Dr. Vale." Lavinia looked toward the exits. Royal guards now blocked them all. Then the door behind the ceremonial throne opened. Dr. Vale entered holding Julian by the collar. A pistol pressed against the boy's temple. Cedric went white. "Release him." Vale smiled. "Order the guards away." Eleanor's gaze remained on Julian. He was frightened but alert. The physician must have escaped custody during the evacuation and found the service passage connecting the palace guardroom to Westminster. Vale backed toward the incense crates. "One shot," he warned, "and the boy dies. If you fire near that powder, the spark may ignite it," Eleanor said. "Then we all die together." "No, the vapor needs heat. The furnaces are extinguished." Vale hesitated. It was the contradiction Eleanor needed. He had helped design the poison, yet he had not known the precise activation method. Lavinia and Sebastian had kept even their physician ignorant of the final mechanism. Eleanor stepped forward. "Your employers intended to kill you too. Once the chamber filled with vapor, there would be no surviving accomplice to testify." Vale looked at Lavinia. "She is lying," Lavinia said quickly. "Ask her where your escape carriage is," Eleanor continued. "Ask why Rook was given passage money while you received none." Vale's pistol shifted slightly away from Julian's head. Cedric lunged. The shot exploded. Julian fell as Cedric struck Vale. Eleanor reached her son and found no wound. The ball had passed through Cedric's side instead. Vale scrambled toward the leaking crate, seized a burning candle, and held it above the powder. "If I cannot leave," he shouted, "none of you will." A second gunshot rang out. Lavinia had taken Sebastian's pistol. Vale collapsed. For one stunned moment, Eleanor thought Lavinia had saved them. Then the widow aimed the weapon at Sebastian. "You promised the Duchess would be dead before tonight," she said. "Now you will tell them this was all your plan." Sebastian stared at his sister. "You designed every part of it." Lavinia cocked the pistol. Eleanor looked at the wet floor beneath her feet and the exposed heating pipe beside Lavinia. Steam pressure was rising again. Someone below had restarted the furnace. The golden powder began to smoke throughout the hall. "Everyone out!" Eleanor shouted. Smoke rose from the golden powder in thin, glittering coils. The nearest minister stumbled, clutching his throat. Sir Matthew pulled open the ceremonial doors, while Haverford's guards dragged Vale and the wounded Cedric toward the corridor. Julian refused to release his father's coat. Eleanor tore a curtain from the wall, soaked it in water, and pressed the wet fabric over Cedric and Julian's faces. "Take them outside." Cedric caught her wrist. Blood spread beneath his hand at his side. "You are coming with us. Someone must stop the furnace. Then I will. You can barely stand." She pulled free and ran toward the service stairs. Lavinia followed, still holding Sebastian at gunpoint. "Open the way to the furnace room." "I do not know the passage," he protested. "You supervised its construction." "So did Ashbourne." Lavinia fired into the ceiling. Plaster rained over them. Sebastian pointed toward a narrow door behind the royal gallery. The three descended a spiral staircase as smoke poured through the iron grills. Below, 2 furnace workers lay unconscious. A pressure gauge trembled in the red zone, and the main valve had been chained open. A man wearing Ashbourne livery fed coal into the flames. He turned when Eleanor entered. Mr. Weller, the missing conservatory keeper. Julian had trusted him. Eleanor had believed he had hidden the powder sample to warn her. Instead, Weller held the furnace shovel like a weapon. "You placed the packet in Julian's toy," Eleanor said, "to lead you here," he replied, and the 6 words, "so you would understand the heating system before it was too late to leave." Lavinia smiled. "Mr. Weller has served my family for 20 years. The old man had entered the Royal Conservatory before Lavinia ever came to Ashbourne. He had tracked Eleanor's research, stolen her bottles, and learned the composition of her sealing wax. Sebastian looked at his sister. "You said Vale organized the laboratory thefts." "Vale was useful, not clever." Eleanor moved closer to the furnace. "Why kill the royal heirs?" "To create a government desperate for stability," Lavinia replied. "Sebastian would reveal the Ashbourne conspiracy, become the savior of Parliament, and receive control of the northern estates. I would govern Ashbourne through Julian's guardianship. You poisoned Julian. Only enough to frighten Cedric into depending on me. Rook exceeded his instructions. You ordered his death in your letter." Lavinia's eyes hardened. "Because you saved him." There it was, the admission. But no impartial witness remained conscious to hear it. Sebastian stepped away from the pistol. "This was never our agreement. You promised no children would die. You accepted the estate. I accepted a political scandal, not the murder of Parliament." Lavinia aimed at him again. "Then die with a cleaner conscience." Eleanor grabbed the pressure release lever. It would not move. "The chain," she told Sebastian, Help me break it." He hesitated. "If this furnace ruptures, your sister's plan dies with you." Sebastian seized an iron bar and struck the chain. Weller swung the shovel at him, but Eleanor threw coal dust into the old man's face. He staggered blindly. Sebastian struck again. The chain snapped. Eleanor pulled the release lever. Steam exploded through the side vent, filling the room with white vapor. The gauge began to fall. Lavinia fired. Sebastian cried out and collapsed with a wound in his thigh. The pistol shot ignited loose coal dust near the open furnace. Flame raced across the floor. Eleanor closed the iron damper, but Weller seized her from behind. His arm locked around her throat. "You should have accepted the asylum," he hissed. She drove her heel into his knee. When his grip loosened, she pushed him toward the broken valve. A jet of steam struck his shoulder, forcing him to the ground. Lavinia retreated up the stairs. Eleanor pursued her into the ceremonial hall, where smoke still hung beneath the ceiling. Most of the powder had been soaked, but several crates remained unopened. Lavinia overturned one and plunged her hands through the golden incense packets. "What are you searching for?" Eleanor asked. "The only evidence that matters." She pulled out a sealed metal cylinder. Eleanor recognized the cipher etched onto its lid. It belonged to the private medical archive she had maintained for the Queen. Inside were Eleanor's original formulas, rewritten to resemble instructions for manufacturing the poison. Lavinia threw the cylinder into a brazier. Eleanor crossed the room and thrust her bare hand into the flames. Pain tore through her palm, but she pulled the cylinder free before the papers caught. Lavinia raised the pistol once more. The hammer clicked on an empty chamber. Behind her, the ministers began returning with Haverford and the royal guards. Eleanor held up the rescued cylinder. "Lady Lavinia has just tried to destroy the forged formulas she intended to present as proof against me." Lavinia looked around at the witnesses, then slowly lowered the useless weapon. Cedric appeared in the doorway, supported by 2 guards. His face was gray, but his voice carried through the hall. "She also acted with my authority," he said. "Authority I gave her after my wife warned me repeatedly." Lavinia's expression changed. She had prepared for Cedric to deny, rage, or protect his reputation. She had never prepared for him to confess. Then Lord Haverford opened Vale's journal to its final pages. "They are blank," he said. Eleanor took the book. Every written entry describing Lavinia's plan had disappeared. The ink had been chemically erased. Eleanor tilted Vale's journal toward the nearest lamp. The paper was damp where the writing had vanished. A sharp odor rose from the pages, lemon salt mixed with bleaching powder. "Someone treated the journal after we recovered it," she said. Haverford looked at the guards who had transported the evidence from the pharmacy. "It never left royal custody." "Then Lavinia has another accomplice inside that custody." Lavinia regained some of her confidence. "There is no journal, no confession, and no witness who can prove I ordered anything. What remains? A frightened wife making accusations while holding formulas written in her own hand." "These are imitations," Eleanor replied. "So you claim." Sebastian was carried into the chamber on a stretcher. His wounded leg had been bound, but his face was conscious and bitter. "Tell them," Eleanor said. "Tell Parliament who designed the scheme." Sebastian looked at his sister. Lavinia's expression carried a silent warning. "I will testify," he said, "in exchange for protection from execution." Several ministers protested immediately. "You helped poison the Queen," Haverford said. "I arranged introductions and payments. Lavinia chose the poisons, the targets, and the evidence. Vale altered the medicines. Weller stole the bottles. Rook transported them." "Convenient," Lavinia said. A traitor blaming his sister to save his neck. Sebastian laughed weakly. She is right. My word alone will not convict her. Eleanor examined the rescued metal cylinder. The forged formulas inside had been copied onto sheets bearing her crest, but one lower corner was stained violet. She touched it carefully. "What ink did you use?" she asked Lavinia. The widow said nothing. Eleanor held the paper near the warmth of a lamp. Brown writing slowly emerged beneath the black imitation text. A second message had been concealed in the fibers. Sir Matthew approached. "Heat revealed ink. Made from cobalt salt," Eleanor said. "The violet stain is the residue." As the paper warmed, hidden lines became legible. "Second delivery confirmed. Vale will certify the Duchess. Weller has obtained the signet. The Queen receives bottle 9 on Thursday." At the bottom appeared the initials L.C. Lavinia scoffed. "Two letters prove nothing. They are not initials," Eleanor said. "They mark your personal cipher." Years earlier, while helping Cedric catalog the Crow family archive, Eleanor had discovered that Lavinia used reversed botanical abbreviations in private correspondence. L.C. did not mean Lavinia Crow. It meant Laurus cerasus, cherry laurel, the poisonous seed present in compound E17. Every concealed message used a plant as its signature. "Warm the other pages," Eleanor instructed. Servants brought lamps. More hidden writing appeared beneath the forged formulas: orders, quantities, dates, and payment instructions. Lavinia had hidden her records inside the very evidence meant to condemn Eleanor, trusting that no one else would know how to reveal them. Then one line exposed the motive. "Ashbourne must fall before Cedric discovers father's settlement." Cedric stared at it. "What settlement?" Sebastian closed his eyes. Lavinia moved suddenly toward the brazier, but the guards restrained her. Eleanor looked through the cylinder and found a narrow parchment sealed with the Crow family crest. It was a copy of an agreement signed by Lavinia's late father. 20 years earlier, Lord Crow had borrowed heavily against lands bordering Ashbourne. If the debt remained unpaid, those lands would legally pass to Cedric upon Crow's death. Sebastian and Lavinia had concealed the debt while secretly selling the same land to investors. Discovery would ruin them and expose them to prosecution for fraud. They did not merely want Ashbourne, Eleanor said. They needed control of its records. If I remained mistress of the estate, I would eventually reconcile the boundary accounts and uncover the false sales. Cedric looked at her. "That is why Lavinia persuaded me you had become obsessed with the ledgers. She turned your resentment of my work into a weapon." His face tightened with the recognition that Lavinia's manipulation had succeeded only because it had appealed to something already inside him. A royal officer hurried into the chamber. "Her Majesty has regained consciousness." Relief moved through the hall. The Queen entered minutes later in a wheeled chair, pale but alert. The Prince Regent walked beside her. Lavinia stared in disbelief. The Queen's gaze settled on Eleanor's burned hand, then on Cedric's blood-stained coat. "I remember Lady Lavinia entering my private chamber yesterday," Her Majesty said. "She claimed the Duchess had changed my medicine and offered to replace it herself." Lavinia's last composure disappeared. "You cannot rely on the memory of a poisoned woman," she said. The entire chamber went silent at her insolence. The Queen lifted one hand. A servant placed a sealed envelope in it. "I anticipated that objection. Dr. Hume anticipated it too." Eleanor stepped forward. "Dr. Hume is dead." "Yes." "Because he discovered Vale had used his name on false medical certificates." The Queen explained that Hume had sent her a journal shortly before his death. Fearing interception, she had sealed the original within the parliamentary archive and given Vale a convincing copy. The book recovered from the pharmacy had been a decoy. The real journal was brought into the chamber. Its pages contained Hume's account of Vale purchasing banned compounds, Weller entering Eleanor's laboratory, and Lavinia requesting medical criteria for declaring a sane woman mentally unfit. Attached to the final page was a letter in Cedric's handwriting. Eleanor recognized it. 6 months earlier, Cedric had written to Vale asking whether prolonged intellectual exertion could make a woman unreliable, suspicious, and unfit to govern her child. He had begun constructing the case against Eleanor long before the poisoning. This was not Lavinia's work, Eleanor said quietly. Cedric did not deny it. I wrote the letter. You planned to take Julian from me? I wanted leverage to make you abandon the investigation. You were willing to have me declared insane because my work embarrassed you. Cedric lowered his head before the Queen, Parliament, and his wife. Yes, the admission destroyed the last excuse available to him. Haverford ordered Lavinia, Sebastian, Vale, Weller, and Rooke held for treason, attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy against the Crown. As the guards closed around her, Lavinia turned to Eleanor. You think you have won? Ask your husband what he promised me in exchange for testifying against you. Eleanor looked at Cedric. His silence told her the answer would wound more deeply than the confession already had. Finally, he spoke. I promised Lavinia that once you were confined, I would petition Parliament to dissolve our marriage and make her the next Duchess of Ashbourne. The chamber remained silent. Eleanor looked at the man she had married 12 years earlier. Cedric had not merely doubted her. He had planned to erase her legal standing, take her child, and place Lavinia in the position Eleanor had built through years of work. When did you promise her this? Eleanor asked. 3 months ago, before the poisonings, before the forged bottles, before Cedric possessed any evidence against her. You had already judged me, she said. Cedric's voice broke. Yes. The Queen ordered the parliamentary hearing resumed at noon. By then, the poisoned incense had been removed, the surviving conspirators secured, and copies of both journals distributed among the ministers. Eleanor stood before Parliament with her burned hand bandaged. She reconstructed the conspiracy without exaggeration. Weller had stolen Bottle 9 and Eleanor's sealing compound. Vale had forged the medical certificate and altered the royal medicines. Rooke transported the poison. Sebastian financed the operation to conceal the Crowe family's fraudulent land sales. Lavinia coordinated the scheme, intending to kill members of the royal succession and blame Ashbourne. Then Eleanor named the decision that had made everything possible. My husband broke the seal on my poison cabinet at Lady Lavinia's request. He gave her my keys and his signet. He ignored evidence that contradicted his accusation because he preferred a guilty wife to a wounded pride. Cedric stood when called. He could have defended himself by describing Lavinia's manipulation. Instead, he faced the ministers and repeated Eleanor's charges in his own words. I lied about entering her laboratory. I signed documents without reading them. I commissioned an inquiry into my wife's sanity because her expertise made me feel diminished. I intended to deprive her of our son and replace her before she had any chance to answer the accusation. He surrendered the petition bearing Eleanor's supposed incompetence and asked Parliament to destroy it publicly. The Prince Regent fed it into the chamber fire. Dr. Vale and Weller were convicted of treason and attempted murder. Rooke received transportation for kidnapping and conspiracy after testifying against the others. Sebastian forfeited the Crowe estates and faced imprisonment for fraud and treason. Lavinia lost her title, property, and royal protection. She was sentenced to life imprisonment for orchestrating the attack upon the crown. Her final gaze remained fixed on Cedric. "You would have believed anyone," she told him, "as long as they promised you were the greater mind." He did not answer. Parliament restored Eleanor's name and granted her independent control of her marriage settlement, laboratory, and medical income. The Queen appointed her director of a new royal commission regulating medicines and private institutions. Most importantly, Julian's guardianship was placed solely in Eleanor's hands until she chose otherwise. Cedric transferred the disputed Crow lands into a trust, supporting hospitals and schools under Eleanor's authority. He also resigned his parliamentary offices and publicly acknowledged that Ashbourne's survival during the epidemics had depended upon the wife he later tried to discredit. None of it purchased forgiveness. 3 weeks later, Eleanor returned to Ashbourne to collect her research. The burned laboratory stood open to the winter sky. Cedric waited inside the ruins. His wound was healing, but he looked older. "I have arranged a residence for you in London," he said. "It belongs to you, not Ashbourne. Julian may live there without interference from me." "That is restitution," Eleanor replied, "not kindness." "I know." He gave her a document relinquishing his authority over her correspondence, income, travel, and professional work. It also guaranteed her continued custody of Julian during their legal separation. "I loved you once," Eleanor said, "but when that love required humility, you chose control." Cedric lowered his eyes. "Is there any future in which you return?" "Not as your wife." The answer wounded him, but he did not challenge it. "What may I be to Julian?" "That will depend upon whether you learn to be his father without using him as your right." Cedric nodded. Eleanor carried the surviving laboratory ledger to the doorway. Julian waited outside beside the Queen's carriage, holding his repaired wooden horse. Months later, Eleanor opened the Royal Institute of Medicine in London. Its first rule prohibited any woman from being confined as insane on a husband's accusation alone. Its second required independent testing of every medicine intended for the crown. At the opening ceremony, Cedric stood among the public rather than beside her. He had funded the institute but held no authority over it. When the applause ended, Eleanor placed Bottle 9 inside a glass evidence cabinet. Beneath it, a brass plaque bore no ducal crest and no husband's name. It read, "Truth requires proof. Authority requires accountability." At the beginning of her ruin, Eleanor had stood beneath Cedric's family portrait, while guards removed the keys from her waist. Now she unlocked the Institute's doors with keys belonging only to her. Julian took her uninjured hand. Together, they stepped inside.